when it's relevant, I can say, well, hey, yeah, I have had this experience, so this is how I've experienced it. Is that similar to the way you experience it? And that gives me the opportunity to meet someone on a different level.
Welcome to Intrinsically Motivated, where we're having conversations with experts in the field of addiction, recovery, and those who've been affected by it as we seek to mobilize the church to replace addiction and mental health challenges with flourishing. On episode 5, we're talking to Dr. Abigail Mack. She's an assistant professor of anthropology at Weber State University. We're going to discuss her work studying addiction and recovery in Appalachia and her personal connection to it. I'm Tanner Clements, and I'm the Media and Training Director for Uplift Appalachia. All right, so I've met you once, so I'm going to be doing a lot more asking you about who you are and that sort of thing. So who are you?
My name is Abby Mack. I am a medical and linguistic anthropologist, and that's who I am, I guess, in terms of the context of this podcast.
So what's a medical linguistic anthropologist? What's the difference in that?
Right. So anthropology traditionally has 4 subfields: archaeology, so that's Indiana Jones; cultural anthropology, which is everybody who's alive; biological anthropology, which is really looking at evolution and our bodies; and then linguistic anthropology, which is really a cross-cultural study of language practices. Some people study how humans acquired language, and others like me look at everyday language in practice to better understand interaction and social change. And I use that lens of looking at language, and I define language really broadly, like gesture.
Body language counts.
Body language, yes, all of it counts. Memes, emojis.
Any way we're communicating with each other.
Any possible way that we are communicating with each other, I look at that, and I use that as a lens to do a little bit more kind of micro-analysis of interactions that people are having in clinical spaces and church spaces. So my previous work was really heavily in clinical and courtroom spaces. So I was really looking at how are people communicating information to each other effectively to make decisions about care. There I was looking at like involuntary mental health care, so crisis mental health emergency care, and how people were looking at a person in crisis and seeing that crisis as a mental health crisis or something else, and then making a decision from there to, do they go to jail? Do they go to the hospital? And then once in the hospital, are we going to treat them against their will? Are we going to let them go back home? And all of that language becomes really important in those spaces because it's all kind of regulated by a law. Right. I was working in California where the law was not so much about does this person need care, but is this person a danger to themselves, to others, or so gravely disabled that they are essentially a danger to themselves. And so how do people see danger? How do they see that as something that is to be responded to with care, or should we incarcerate this person? And so I was really looking at the flows between mental health care spaces in Los Angeles and the jail systems and all of the people. And there were a lot of like medical practitioners who were working in both jail and hospital spaces. Like, how are they making those shifts from institutions? How are they making, what is happening to the people who are the subjects of this care? So I am very much a medical anthropologist concerned with healing, and language becomes one tool that I use to understand that process.
So how did you find that this was what you wanted to study, get into?
It was a long and winding road.
Okay, I got time.
So when I was, I think China also said, like, there was this magical undergrad moment in an anthropology class. I was a freshman at Indiana University, and I was, at the same time that I was taking an introduction to anthropology course, I was also taking a literature class that really looked at Appalachian literature, actually. And I had this sort of moment in the class where I was realizing the similarities between the ethnographic work that I was reading in this anthropology class on culture and ritual and practice and being human, and the semi-autobiographical but fictional work that I was reading in this literature class about a region in the United States. So I went to the individualized major program at IU, and I said, listen, I'm really interested in how ethnography and like fiction and literature and creative writing intersect. Like, I think it was actually like this stormy night kind of moment, like 3 a.m. I can't be pre-med like my family wants me to. I have to do this thing. I need to understand how people are telling stories. This is what I'm interested in. And I talked to the director of the program, and he was like, yep, I love that. And he took me on as his mentee. Luckily, and he was a person who had studied to be a Catholic priest. So there's a lot of the, like, in retrospect, a lot of the seeds of this project were already there. Appalachia, faith, storytelling. So I thought I wanted to do a project. Then, I also had an anthropologist come on board as another mentor, and we kind of designed a project around women's healthcare in the Dominican Republic. So I went down there, I did some studying, and it wasn't when I was there, but when I came back, I realized I didn't feel that comfortable in that space, that I actually wanted to use these tools in the United States, and that I felt like that was where I had the ground to begin doing this research. And I was also very interested in problems that were really close to home for me, mental health care and substance use. So I ended up throwing my project out and met a couple. I started volunteering for this group that was offering services to family members who were visiting loved ones in jail. And the group there, all we did was on visiting days for the jail, we'd just go out with some water, food, links to other resources in the community, and we'd sit on the curb and we'd talk to people and just like ask them what they need. And I didn't really smoke cigarettes, but I was really nervous and didn't know how to interact with people, and everyone was smoking cigarettes. So I bought a pack of cigarettes and I'd let people bum them, and I'd sit and I just like that. I like learned how to talk to people, and I met a couple who were in the midst of recovery from methamphetamine, and the wife was incarcerated and and had just given birth, and her husband was visiting daily to pick up breast milk from her. And I ended up following this story really intimately for about 8 months. And that became my first real moment of like, aha, yep, this is what I'm going to do. But it also felt a little bit too close for me because I had family members who were struggling with substance use. And it made me nervous to go down that path. So I ended up going to study in a master's program, communication and culture, where I could like look at this from a distance, like look at political rhetoric around substance use and incarceration and mental health, and maybe not be so close to it because I was kind of scared. And in the process, I just kept reading these articles that would use phrases like the mentally ill, the homeless, and knowing people intimately who fell into those categories, I found myself getting really frustrated. Like, I can't do this kind of work. I actually do need to be with the people. I also, at that time, got diagnosed with cancer. So I was going through cancer treatment and kind of having another sort, like that academic line was kind of matching up with a more like personal, what do I want to make my life about kind of question. And I was only 25, and I was just kind of floating. And my master's advisor, who will tell you, she's just wonderful, Alana Gershon, kind of had this moment with me where she was like, I was like dancing around anthropology, dancing around it. Like, I could just stay here. This could be okay. And she was like, you've got to do this. And so that brought me to UCLA, and my master's program, being so heavily focused on communication, inspired me to continue bringing in the linguistic stuff while doing this project that was close to home, and finding ways to do that in a way that really I felt capable to do. So my first project was, my dissertation project was much more about the institutions, because that distance felt safe for me. I still needed a little bit more space before I could get to the people, right? And yeah, so that's my like kind of come to anthropology moment.
So I mean, obviously you kind of make it sound like you were kind of fighting it because you were kind of scared of what that might mean, all that. So when you finally did get into it, how did that, was there a change in you before you got it? It's like, no, I'm going for it. Or was it like a sense of relief when you got there? Or is it still kind of a constant struggle? Or what was that like for you as you kind of got closer?
Yeah, it's a constant struggle, and I think it should be. Honestly, I think if you're going to do this work with other people and you have intimate ties to it, and this work is about other people, you know, I'm really trying to understand other people's processes. I have to be mindful of the ways that my experiences inform how I'm interacting with them, and be aware of when that could be a liability, right? Like, am I treating this person this way because they remind me of my sister? And so maybe I need to like take a moment, or like, and when it can be a real asset because I have grown up in trying to care for people who are very hard to care for because of various limitations on access to healthcare is a big one, you know, like that was a big frustration for me, but also because, at least in the case of my sister who used substances or had an alcohol addiction, was doing something dangerous, right? So I have just, it remains a constant struggle, but it's like I'm learning. I've been learning a new sport, right? Like I'm practiced now in like being able to hold myself in check a little bit more. I still always need people to, you know, point that out sometimes, but I've learned to see it as a real asset. But yeah, it was, it was a very tiptoeing process still. Like for a while I was like, okay, I am going to study mental health care, emergency mental health care. But I ended up going down this really philosophical route because it felt too painful, I think, to be so intimately with it yet. I had a really big shift, and I feel comfortable writing about this because it's going to be published in an essay. But my sister died by suicide right after I finished my field work in LA. And that really shook me to my core. Quite literally, I couldn't stand for a couple of days. And for months afterwards, I would be so overwhelmed by the grief, I would vomit. And that moment really, it shook a lot of the fear off too. Because I was like, the stakes are too high. And there is something there in that experience that is worth, if I can manage it, if I'm brave enough, using to meet other people and learn their stories more intimately. And then, of course, I had the great good fortune of meeting China. Totally unexpected to be pulled into this, or not pulled into, some ways pulled into, to be brought into this project. And because of COVID, I had the opportunity to sort of reestablish relationships or direct the project in other ways that allowed me to use those strengths, I think, even though it was very painful to use those strengths.
So what was it? So I guess just for context's sake, what is it that you are bringing to the project now? What is it that you're kind of, what is your part in this?
So I was hired as a postdoc. So previously postdoctoral student researcher. Previously before that, Josh was working in that role. And so it's the postdoc in an anthropological world is sort of ambiguous, but in this space, it's really meant to kind of mentor you into that next step of professionalization, to have a little bit of additional time after your doctorate to kind of grow your skills. And a lot of postdocs are teaching, but this one was research. So I ended up, even though the postdoc was based at UVA, I ended up renting a home in Tennessee and living here. And so every day for a year and a half, I was either at a clinic or at a church space or driving someone somewhere or hanging out on a curb, going out to eat with someone, just doing that. What China had mentioned was deep hanging out with people. And really, we started to focus on really following a few key individuals through their process, learning about how they navigate recovery, and also how once they have successfully shifted their relationship with whatever substance, how they keep that, right? Like that work that is necessary after the recovery moment. And also because I have, I think and we all have these personal relationships with mental health, with substance use. It's everywhere. Like,
right.
It would be really hard to meet someone who didn't have...
Has zero connection. Because
Yeah.
they've never left their house and they've never talked to anyone.
Somehow a hermit, like who lives in a mountainside and has never had any human interaction. Might not.
But even then.
It's possible. So...
that's trauma in itself, just being by yourself like that, I would feel.
Yeah. So I think that I was really lucky to have China as a co-PI who really empowered me to get into that a bit and to allow that place, which I was really afraid of, which felt really messy to me, to be very productive space to really think through beyond just like a theoretical or philosophical way. What is healing? What is recovery? What is it? But like very really materially, what does it mean to care for someone? What does it mean to be in the midst of recovery? What are, we can say a lot of platitudes about love and you just got to love them, but that's really hard to do.
It's really difficult. Yeah.
It's extremely difficult. And so then what does that look like? And how do people practice loving each other well? So that's what I've been doing. I'm sorry, I keep taking these.
No. Well, and you said, I'm interested with this thought that you said, kind of letting your experience that you've had kind of inform what it is that you're doing. How has that impacted what it is that you're doing? How has that maybe either changed something about your approach or really impacted the things that you've learned along the way, you think?
Well, I think that there is this sort of mythos of this sort of objective researcher who somehow can be a robot and ask questions with no intention or bias and can somehow navigate the, I think having as much personal experience as I have had has really forced me to let go of that mythos so that I can talk to people. And I don't share my experience with everyone that I'm working with, but when it's relevant, I can say, well, hey, yeah, I have had this experience. So this is how I've experienced it. Is that similar to the way you experience it? And that gives me the opportunity to meet someone on a different level, to meet them at a level where they can correct me quicker. I'm like, no, that's not how I experience it. Or, yes, and this other thing is also very important for you to see. It facilitated more connections, and it also allowed me to feel more authentically in the field work. I think that it's really hard to do deep hanging out if you're always holding something back, if you're always like taking this role of I'm still an outsider. There are benefits to that, and definitely in moments. I never had an experience in a charismatic church before, so I was an outsider there.
You're going to feel, yeah, absolutely. This is not what I'm used to.
Yeah, it was a totally new experience for me. And of course, even in those moments that you think are like so similar to you, they of course are not, because it's a different person. So like, I think it's given me the opportunity to practice being humble and honest and with myself, and also to dig into things I don't think I could dig into with a lot of the research participants that we work with if I hadn't had those experiences. If I hadn't known if I hadn't known at like a very visceral level what the stakes are in those experiences. So I think it has been a real asset for me, and it's been a real opportunity to stretch my like courage muscles, I guess.
Have you felt like you've grown in that way, in that area, since you've been kind of getting to practice it more and more and more? How's that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, like a lot of people who have family members who've been incarcerated, or family members who are struggling with mental health issues or substance use disorders, there's a level of shame. And you walk into a professional space, even anthropology, which is all about deep hanging out, and all of these world problems that people are studying, like substance use or the mentally ill, they seem out there. And so I experienced a lot of shame being in a space where that was out there, but I was in that space, And so there's kind of like there's been an experience of like getting more comfortable with saying, yes, I have those experiences. Yes, they inform my research. Yes, they can be a liability, but they are also an asset. And in owning that kind of positionality, hopefully I can get to have conversations not just with the people I'm working with, which is the most important and not a just, but also with other anthropologists to say like, hey, we don't need to pretend we're such objective outsiders. Here's
a potential other approach that we could be taking. Or something.
And there's lots of anthropologists since the beginning of anthropology who've been doing this.
So I'm sure that's not the first time that's happened, but at the same time, it's like you said, everybody's a unique person, has a unique set of experiences to kind of bring to whatever that situation is. So,
Yeah, and I think like it's that weird tension with anthropology as sort of a science, sort of a humanistic practice. Is like sometimes when we are trying to legitimize ourselves as scientists too much, we emphasize that objectivity, and yes, it is valuable to keep your biases in check, but also this discipline allows us to get to be fully human ourselves if we let ourselves.
So you're studying human beings while being one. At the you can't stop being who you are.
I'm not a robot, thank goodness.
Right.
So it is. Yeah, I would say like navigating those boundaries around my personal relationship and the research has certainly been a challenge. But yeah, it's absolutely. I've let go of that shame a lot. Like I've been able to just live with it and be grateful for it.
Well, and I'm sure that's probably given you the opportunity to maybe learn something that somebody who didn't approach it that same way wouldn't have, maybe somebody else wouldn't have noticed the same trend or the same thing that we're seeing a lot, but because you kind of are being informed by a different background, that's probably been really beneficial to discovering certain things along the way.
I'd say so, but I would also say like I couldn't do this without it being necessarily had to be a collaborative project. Like there's no way this project could ever have been done by one person alone. And in a dream world, we would have maybe had several other people with different perspectives also doing this work so that we could all like notice these other things. But absent that, it still has been a really dream project and a real honor to be a part of, like deep honor.
So I think having been in it, what are the things that maybe stand out to you that you've learned? Maybe what were some of the big kind of through lines or trends that you've seen that maybe to you stand out that maybe to a different researcher, they would have seen something completely different, seeing the exact same set of circumstances, but maybe you've pulled out that's unique to you?
So my other sister has described the practice sometimes of caring for someone who's in crisis as like, they're in a burning building and they're like, help, I'm in this burning building. And so you run in and you get a little singed and maybe you get knocked around a bit, but you get them out and you're like, phew, you're safe. And then they punch you in the face and run back in the building. It's like, oh, and that experience is familiar to me. And I think that kind of feeling, which leads to a lot of resentment about caring for people in crisis, comes from not having the necessary boundaries, or not having really worked through what your own limitations and needs are. And I say this lovingly because my sister, Maggie, is like the world's best caregiver in person, and I love her deeply. And she's also human, and I have experienced those things as well. So I think that having had those experiences of having stretched myself too thin, I came into this project really aware that I was going to need some like really hard boundaries. Or not hard, but set. But sometimes it's hard to figure out what those boundaries are until you're actually living the thing. And so I really got to learn a lot about myself in terms of what my limitations are, what my capacities are, and how to live with the idea that I might have made a mistake, or maybe I could have done this a little bit differently. How to allow life to play out, again, without being attached to a specific outcome like China has talked about. And without totally expending myself, but I'm learning how to practice being better at it. And I'd say practicing has become a huge part of this, rather than trying and failing, or like moving through this idea of practicing has been really helpful. And it's also been helpful to kind of relate to people when you see them struggle. You are in a relationship, friendship, whatever kind of relationship with someone who is struggling, and they seem to be doing well, and you have built up this hope of like, this is it, finally this person that I love is going to be safe at the minimum, but like maybe hopefully more than safe, like begin to thrive, and then relapse happens. We have a tendency to see that as back to zero. And in like AA models, it would be back to day zero. But what I've seen in this project is I haven't yet seen that be the case. When I've witnessed relapse, it's been, but I already have all these tools. I already have learned all of this.
I have a different foundation that I'm starting from this time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's not that I have failed. It's that I was practicing recovery this way. Now I know this thing doesn't work, and I could do it slightly differently. And that model of thinking about recovery has actually been really helpful for me personally in terms of thinking about my own recovery from burnout, recovery from, I was working a job that was really hard. And, grad school is exhausting. And like learning how to think about my own kind of movement into more of a good life, like, that is practice. I'm gonna hit some rock bottoms. I'm gonna work myself again too hard until I get the flu, and then I'm gonna have to be sick at home, and then I'll try to do better next time. And
I think that's that's a really helpful idea, I think, for people that are wanting to kind of jump into that realm of like addiction, service, support, whatever that may look like, whether it's a church or whoever. Just this idea of like, you're going to see all these little progress points, and then you're going to feel like, oh, we lost all our progress, but you're not. That's a big idea that I think could be really helpful. Just to like keep people feeling motivated and hopeful for the long term, being like, there are going to be speed bumps along the way. Like that, 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of thing. It's still not 3 steps back. That's a really cool idea. I like that idea. I think that's super helpful.
We're definitely working through it still. And like thinking through that for the project, I think it also, you talk about hope. I think it also kind of highlights like sometimes, we've got like word art is really popular. You see like faith, love, hope, and they kind of just sit up there as like these things that exist, and we like them, we love them. Those are great things to have, but they're actually really hard to practice. Right.
Yeah.
So hard to practice. And hope in particular, the kind of hope that isn't about a projected outcome, one specific outcome you want to see happen, but is about loving people, being open to them, having kind of that kind of hope. Takes so much practice, so much work, and it's also going to be one of those things that's like up and down and up and down.
So where are you in this process right now? So now you're just trying to compile all of what you've seen and try to make it useful.
Yeah, so we're working through data right now, as we're visiting people, checking in, and this is the kind of work that I think is just going to go on for a while. But yeah, we're in the process of beginning to write, beginning to see the patterns, beginning to think about what is useful and how do we convey this responsibly. So many people opened themselves up to us, and what an honor. What an honor to have someone say, yes, I'm going to share my whole life story with you. But also then once they've done that, you have a big responsibility, like to do that well. So that takes time. So we're in that process now, and I am hopeful. that it'll be good.
And what do you hope will be the impact once you get it all kind of put together?
Well, I hope that it will be a resource for people who are either in recovery or trying to care for people in recovery. I hope that we can make some of these, like I said, kind of fluffy notions of faith, love, and hope a little bit more material and concrete for people to see, like what that looks like in active practice, all of the conflict and messiness and tensions and mistakes and trying again that comes with that. I think that that is really valuable to share with people and for people to see. And so I hope that we can do a good job of that, a good enough job of that. Like, people can get what they need out of it, but we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Next time on Intrinsically Motivated.
Everything that I was mourning was up here in my head. And that completely took me on a very dark spiral downward. I got very angry with God, especially, more than anyone.
Intrinsically Motivated is an Uplift Appalachia podcast. Uplift Appalachia seeks to replace addiction and mental health challenges with flourishing. And we believe that an intrinsically motivated church is the answer. To learn more, visit upliftappalachia.org.